Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. I want to say at the outset, I had a great comment the other day that tagged me on LinkedIn, which I'm not on a whole lot, but I do post these episodes there. And somebody from a small town in England had listened to the episode we had with Jared Wheeler about a couple of small towns in central or southeast Kansas, and was actually a very popular episode. I think it probably still has one of the highest downloads of any of the episodes that I've seen. But basically, the content was, do you want to be a bitterness factory or a hope factory? And it was a terrific interview. Jared was great. And we covered a lot of stuff, and it was one of those things to find that somebody in a country that I don't even live in, across an ocean, listened to the episode, got something useful out of it, and actually did something in their community that was pretty incredible to see. And I said in a post afterwards or a comment afterwards that, there's plenty of times that I struggle with getting episodes out or getting things on the calendar for doing the podcast. This is really a glorified hobby for me. I try to squeeze it in when I can among my other priorities. So sometimes it falls down the list in terms of making sure episodes get done or guests get scheduled. And there's certainly times where I struggle to, think about, well, do I keep doing this? I've got so many things that I'm working on and so many efforts. It does take some time, not a ton of time, but it does take a little time to put these out. And when you get a message like that something they heard on the episode really was of value and resonated, that's certainly the kind of thing that makes me stop and think, well, that's pretty fantastic, and gives me the juice to keep going and keep producing these. Because otherwise it's me sitting alone in a room, maybe on Riverside here talking to somebody, or I might have somebody here in the studio with me having a conversation, and you just never really know. You get the numbers, you can get the numbers from Apple and Substack and Spotify, but you never really know how many people are actually listening, or who's listening. And so it's really terrific to hear a comment like that resonated with somebody and they actually turned into action in their own community. So thank you to all of you who listen. If you actually have taken something away from an episode that helped you in some way, I'd love to hear it. That's really why I do this. In many respects, I want to share knowledge and wisdom from people that I interview, from myself, from a lot of years of working in urban planning, development, architecture, and hopefully help people who are newer in the field, or even people who've been around a little while, just think about things differently. And that's really the crux of the podcast. And so anyway, thanks for listening, and just always eager to know or interested to know of something that may have helped. So thank you all. Today, I'm going to actually take a few minutes, and we're going to do an episode. I'm going to do an episode here that is a little bit more of a pontification, so to speak. And I don't do a ton of this. I don't like to do a ton of it because I think after a while it can just get really boring if you're listening to one person and hearing their opinions all the time. Sometimes interesting, sometimes it just gets old. But there are certainly things that I see and run across, and the observations that I want to share from my chair, from what I see out in the world, uh, and uh, and I do so not just to try to be smart, not try to be the clever person doing it, but really in an effort to try to help people understand their world, understand what's going on, and ultimately to try to do good things to make it better. And I don't think you can really truly make your world better unless you see it for what it really is. See the world as it is through clear eyes. Understand what's going on. Try to set aside your own biases as much as you can, and then get to work. And so, what I want to talk about here today is something that off the cuff may sound pretty negative. And in my role with the organization that I lead, and just in general, I try very hard to be an optimistic person. I think it's my nature. It's my disposition to be a very positive person. But I think in life, I think it's always a good idea in life to have a positive attitude and to try to make sure you have a feeling that whatever's going on, that you can overcome it. Because that's true. And I think if you have the right attitude and the work ethic, and the desire, you can overcome obstacles and bad situations. And so I firmly believe that. But I think you also have to understand um, potentially worst case scenarios. Kind of reminds me of that kind of silly popular little book series, the Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook. And I mean, those sold a lot of copies for a reason, because we want to think about bad things that could happen and how do we survive them? How do we get through them? And so I think from time to time, we have to understand best and worst case scenarios for things that are happening, and what might actually, what you might do about it. So I am somebody who is a lover of cities. I love big cities. I have, even though I grew up in small towns, I've always been fascinated by the big city, and I live in the urban core of a major metro area here in Kansas City, and I like city living. Um, and I work every day to try to help our city get better, to improve on many facets of it, from design to management of public space and more. But I think it's a good time to step back and think about what's going on with big cities, big American cities, and are we in a real danger zone? And what I want to outline here today is sort of a what you might call like a worst case scenario uh, thought experiment for what's happening in big cities and what might happen in the coming years. Um, I, I think there's a 50-50 chance that we're in the midst of a tough time that could get a lot worse for a lot of big cities. So let me preface all that by saying, I used to give a lot of lectures 20, 25 years ago about cities and demographics, and, what young people were liking and wanting. And even as much as 30 years ago. And in my region, I would talk a lot about how I think people really love walkable communities. And I think you're going to see a generation of change where people move into big cities again and reverse the white flight and the flight from cities that we saw in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And I will tell you, a lot of people, especially in business and in real estate in my town, thought I was nuts. They would just, they couldn't imagine that people would want to, especially young people, would want to move in big numbers back into the city. Um, and I felt like it was kind of an obvious thing to see. I was also a younger person at the time, so I think I felt like I had a good finger on the pulse of what young people were thinking. And it seemed to me that's what people were loving and where they wanted to be. And ultimately that did happen. And we saw a real boom of back to the city movement, a real population increase in most big cities in their urban core areas, really starting in the 1990s and going all the way, up until about the late 20 teens. And uh, and similarly, I would talk with people in that era, in the early internet era, and say, well, look, it seems to me it's pretty obvious that a lot of big box retail and suburban retail is going to get crushed by the internet. And I mean, nobody knew on what time scale or anything else, but um, that notion, that thought process was based on a notion that a lot of suburban retail, especially big box retail, power centers, they're not an enjoyable experience. It's a commodity process. You're really just shopping to get whatever the cheapest goods are, the best value that you can get for the best product. And no, hardly anybody really enjoyed the experience, of driving to a big strip center and then spending a lot of time shopping in these big stores with lousy customer service, but good prices. And so it took some time, but eventually, yes, eventually the internet really did crush a lot of that retail. And it has moved into delivery services, notably Amazon, but there are many other companies as well. And almost all those companies that do big box stores have struggled in some respect. Many have closed. Some are still hanging on by turning into basically delivery versions of their old stores. And it has changed the face of retailing in many ways. I had a great episode not too long ago with Jaime Izurieta, where we talked about the changing face of retail. And it's a good one to go back and listen to, especially if you're in the retailing world or in development where you might have retailing. So um, I'm not saying all that again to say that I'm like the smartest person in the world about these things. I'm just saying that every so often you can kind of see, if you are really paying attention to what's going on in the culture and with technology, that you can identify trends um, before they happen in a big way. Um, and um, you can be wrong a lot as well, but it's not terribly hard to identify a lot of major shifts in the culture or what you see with technology coming. So that's my preface to say that what I think we're in right now is I think there's another shift coming, and it's something that I'm, as a lover of big cities, that I'm concerned about. Like I said, I think there's a 50-50 chance that uh, I'm not going to say with certainty this is happening, but I think there's a 50-50 chance. There's a scenario where what I'm going to describe is likely. So I still maintain that it's in our nature as human beings that we love walkable places. I think it's a core human trait, actually. And it speaks to us very, very deeply in ways that are hard for most of us to express until you've actually experienced it. Because especially in our country, in the United States, we spend so much of our life shuttling around in a vehicle. We tend to think that's just life. That's normal. That's the way it is. And of course, everybody lives that way. But then when you have those moments, when you have those opportunities, whatever it is, if it's on vacation, if it's a move that happens, and you don't have to live that way for some period of time, even if it's just a week, it does impact your thinking. There's something about that I think that really gets to our nature. We want to use our bodies to move around, and we like seeing other human beings more, walking around, riding bicycles in that more face-to-face manner, as opposed to through the windshields of vehicles, if we see them at all. So I firmly believe that is a core to our nature as humans, and something that will we will always strive for and identify with, and that in fact people will pay more money to have the opportunity to experience. I think it's also true, though. I mean, in America, we kind of identify that quality as being in like downtown areas and big cities. Um, and that's not necessarily, that's not universally true, but that's kind of how we identify it, as like, if you're a person who wants to walk places, you live in a city. If you don't want that, you live in a suburb. And uh, if if you want some mixture of both, maybe you live in a small town or a rural area. Um, so the challenge is, though, that well, there's multiple challenges that I think I'll talk about. But one of the things that is that we have mismanaged our big cities in such insane ways that I think we are in the midst of seeing a shift away from them. And we did so many dumb things in the 20th century that I think we're going to we're going to see the bill for a lot of that come due. These are things like obviously urban renewal, which happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The whole idea of a downtown as like a place to commute to, that it's an office district, no different than if it were like a manufacturing district, instead of thinking of it as a neighborhood. Um, the whole concept of like bigness of everything that we really fully embraced in the 20th century, that can work for a time and a place, but is not universally loved. And people tend to eventually want to move away from bigness. Um, Even the financialization of our economy in very big ways that I think we're seeing a lot of issues with today. And so, there has what we have. There's this combination of these traits, which concern me, and also wrap themselves up in really awful management of big cities, which I will come back to later because I want to talk about how we might fix that or try to improve it. But there's also a very strong cultural vibe shift that has happened in the last year or so. So I'm not going to belabor this point. There's a ton of people who've written about this, who talk about it. I think I think most people probably have noticed it. If you haven't, if you think there isn't a shift or you haven't noticed it, you're probably not paying attention at all, or you don't want to pay attention. And you know what? Maybe not paying attention is a healthier way to live. I'm not going to argue that, but there's definitely been a shift in the culture. And like I said, I think there is a 50-50 chance that this shift, combined with some of the other factors of how we have mismanaged big cities, is going to be really, really bad. And I think there's a very solid scenario that we are 5 years into a 20 or 30-year period of struggle and decline for a lot of urban cores in big cities. I don't think this could or will get as bad as the decline that we had in the 1970s. And I'll speak about that for a minute later, but it could get quite bad. So I want to talk about why this is and what's going on and why I think what I think we might be able to, lovers of cities might be able to do about it. So I think the first thing I would say is there's obviously been a horrific crime wave in a lot of big cities especially in the COVID and post-COVID era, and that gets a lot of the press. It certainly gets a lot of attention in my town, and we live in a city where it's just been unacceptably bad, and that's a fairly that has been a new thing. And I know there's a lot of people who like to use statistics and say, "Oh, look, it's really not as bad," but I for one don't really believe most crime statistics, because I'll just tell you, anecdotally, we talk to people every day who experience crime in our city, and they just never report it. A lot of people don't report what happens, and they don't report it because either they think nothing's going to come of it, or they report it and they say, well, if I report it, my insurance is going to go up, or I'm going to get canceled from my insurance. So there are reasons that people have for not reporting things, and I would tell you in many respects that for people who try to make apologies for the crime situation we have in most big cities, I really think they're out to lunch. And it would be helpful if people would not try to minimize that, because it's a big deal. It's the sort of thing that really impacts real lives, not just the crimes that are committed, but what happens when people are victims of crimes, and then they tend to say, forget it. I'm going to never try to let that happen again. So I'm not going to go to this area or that area, or maybe I'll just move somewhere else where I don't have to deal with it. That's a real thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those basics, some of the things that I think that concern normal people that have notably gotten worse the last several years. And crime is, like I said, the headline grabber, but that has definitely been one. Um, I want to shift a little bit. I'll come back to those things, but I want to shift a little bit and talk about some of the economic disruption coming as well, because there's so much that's happened in the last several years. With COVID, we saw the push to remote work, and a lot of people have come back to the office, but not everybody. There's there's still a lot more remote work, and I think you're going to see remote work itself as a fairly normal part of the work environment for indefinitely. I do think there's a ton of value of being in the office with people, but I think we're finding there's a lot of jobs that can be done remotely and will be done remotely, because there's no loss of value or efficiency. The big headline grabber in the economic world, obviously, is AI, and what's happening with the rise of artificial intelligence, and this is obviously the next big thing. It's where all the money is going in terms of venture capital, is to AI products and services. And I think for a lot of us right now, I hardly ever really use it much myself right now. Any of the various forms of AI, I'm aware of a lot of the tools. We've used some of them at work. But I'm not like the earliest adopter where I'm using these things, but I know people who are, and they're using them quite a bit. And it's obvious to me that this technology, just like all previous technologies, will evolve. And that over the course of the next decade, it will produce major change in so much in our economy and the way that people work. So I've said this before. I had a chance to speak about this at a CNU session a couple of years ago. But I think there's a real scenario where AI, the technologies of AI, as they evolve, again, not as they necessarily are today, but as they evolve, are going to be a tremendous job killer for a lot of office work, and especially for a lot of middle management work, for a lot of production-oriented work that companies do. And a lot of that happens in downtowns and in suburban office parks. And so I think about industries that I know, some better than the others, like accounting, architecture, legal, government. It's fairly obvious to me that there's a lot of jobs there that AI will learn how to do and do really well. And you'll see tremendous job loss in some of those areas. Now, I just want to say, big picture, I'm definitely, somewhat of the mindset that says whenever you have a technology change, you have job losses in some areas, and then you have job creation in others. And I'm overall firmly of the belief that AI will unlock other jobs that we don't know anything about today, and there will be new jobs created. We have seen that with every technological advance, that there are jobs that people couldn't even imagine. I mean, who would have heard of a social media influencer 30 years ago as a job, or even just a social media manager, which almost every company of size has now. There are lots and lots of potential jobs that could be created with new technology, and I think we will see that. But I also think it, just like every new technology, it will disrupt a lot of existing industries and the way that people do business, and it will spark major change. So when we had a shift from agriculture to manufacturing, we lost a ton of jobs in agriculture. And that had an enormous impact on rural areas and small towns, many of which have never recovered all over the country. They may be plodding along, but they have basically never grown in population since then. When we had a shift from a lot of manufacturing being automated or outsourced or moved to other countries, obviously it had an enormous impact on cities all over the country. Um, Another way that I think about this is that, if you had lived in Detroit in 1950, you would have thought it was the center of the universe. And you could not imagine Detroit being anything but an incredible, prosperous place. Uh, and it really just took about 30 years, and that was done. I mean, there's still prosperity in Detroit. There's still money. There's still great companies there. But the city itself was eviscerated with changes in the economy. Um, so, uh, and that happened, in many sense, that happened with labor and capital being outsourced to non-union and lower labor cost areas. Then you had competition come in from overseas. I think then you could probably argue we had over-regulation on the industry, and all of that combined to really ultimately cause a tremendous downturn, so that like somebody who lived in Detroit in 1950 probably couldn't even identify with the city as it was just 30 or 40 years later. Just remarkable decline. So these things can happen, and they do happen. We go through boom and bust cycles with cities, with specific places, and with specific industries, and so I think it's something we have to be mindful of and think about, how do you prepare for that. The other reason I think about how things might impact a city or a downtown area in particular, one of the things that kind of sticks in my head a lot is that when people give up on an area, let's say somebody leaves the city to move to the suburbs, basically they're never coming back. So if somebody says they leave a city out of frustration for like the crime situation or the bad schools, guess what? They're not coming back. And so not only have you lost that person, but you have probably lost them forever. So now you've got to attract new people, entirely new people. So it's really important to try to hold on to your current residents and your current population. By the way, if they leave, they're going to shit talk the place as well, which hurts it in the minds of others. But it's like one of the biggest myths that kind of took over the real estate industry in the last 20 years or so was that like baby boomers were all going to like sell their big suburban homes and downsize and move into urban centers. Um, I mean that has not happened in any real numbers. I know there are tiny movements you can measure here and there, but in any real sense of the word, that has just not happened. And the reality is most people, when they choose to live in a place, they're going to stay there. And a lot of that generation, they're going to stay in their big home as long as they possibly can. Uh, and, and by the way, they probably have a lot of wealth tied up in that house that they might lose a good chunk of that if they move it, if they move out of there, who knows? So um, I think, one of the things that we tend to underestimate is like when people leave, they're probably not coming back, or when they pick up, when they identify with the place, they're going to stick there a long time. So it's an area of concern because I think there are going to be some big cities that are not going to see their way out of this era. They're really going to struggle. And some of those are probably cities that really doubled down on like the commute to downtown idea. I think there are others that have pivoted a little bit more and that embrace more common sense approaches, and that I think will probably be fine. So nothing is ever universal. A lot of our places are different all over the country. For years I've said we spend way too much energy thinking about what's going to happen in New York City. New York City is a unicorn in the United States. There is no other city in the country like it. It often will survive many flaws because it's just so unique, and it's a financial capital, it's a fashion capital, it's a music capital, it's an entertainment capital. So it has so many assets that it can survive lots and lots of things that go wrong. Even though, by the way, it did also have a very serious decline in the 1970s. But I like to think more about the more typical American cities that are not those kind of unicorns, and what might happen with them and how they might survive and prosper. So I should also say before I kind of tease that I don't think there's a scenario where things get as bad as they were in the 70s. And there's a few reasons for that. I think one of the things that we underestimate, there's a lot of stuff that we tried in the 1960s and 70s in terms of ideas for cities that didn't work because the culture just wasn't ready for it. This was the era of building suburbia for the first time. And it was incredibly glamorous and desirable on the part of many, many people. So it wasn't just, like working class people wanted to buy a house in the suburbs and have a little more space. It was everybody, young people, old people, people with money. Um, the move to the suburbs idea was very attractive, and almost everybody was in for it. And so um, that was a major difference. That's not really the case anymore. Now there's a lot more uh, just kind of different factions about how people see cities and suburbs. There's a lot more people who I think are more bought in today to the idea of sticking with a city and not giving up on it because they just don't really want the suburban life. Uh, Another thing that's happened is we also have most cities have created place management organizations that are like ours. They're BIDs and SIDS and others that really focus on issues, sort of boots on the ground. That didn't exist in a lot of those cities in that era. And these groups kind of can act as a bulwark to bad things happening and really help areas stay cleaner and safer, and really prevent some of the worst things that are happening. And then also, there's a lot of cities that have embraced some form of school choice that helps keep families in cities. So, my city is one of those where we have a pretty aggressive school choice program that where we have a lot of charter schools, and there are a lot of families who love those schools, and they're not going to give up on the city just because they love those schools so much. And because if you move out of those districts, then you've got to, you're giving up on the school. So that's an issue. So I think another way to think about this is, so those are things that I think are different and better that could help cities coming forward. What's worse, or what's different from the 70s that could be a problem? There's a lot more disbursement of jobs across metro areas now than there were than there was in that era. Uh, AI, I talked about, is a real threat. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's a lot of transit systems in big cities, and the handful of cities that really have a robust transit system, a lot of them are really hurting post COVID, and especially with commuting patterns changing, the transit systems really get hurt by that as well. Um, and in the 70s, there was cities had federal revenue sharing. Like the federal government would actually send money directly to cities as revenue sharing. That doesn't exist anymore. And now we have $37 trillion of federal debt. There's not going to be big help coming from the federal government, no matter who your political party is. I just don't think there's I don't think you can expect a ton of help from the feds for big cities. So um, one aspect of this that I want to hit on related to AI, um, because I don't think this gets talked about enough in development circles. Uh, there's a lot, I mentioned before that I think there's a lot of displacement coming relative to certain industries. One of the primary economic development mantras the last 20 years or so has been what people call eds and meds, which is education, higher education related jobs and medical related jobs. Um, so there's a ton of cities, including my own, that have benefited from uh, incredible investment in those areas, and hospital systems that have just grown and grown and grown. Research that's gone into medical or life sciences, university systems that have spent a lot of money on building on facilities of all kinds, and some have grown. So I think one of the things that we should be seriously concerned about, again, as a city person, is what is the future of eds and meds? And I'm just gonna I'll stick a I'll put a flag in the ground right now and say that I think eds and meds is done as an economic development tool, and I think AI and new technology is going to have a tremendous negative impact on those fields as job centers. For one, I don't even know how the medical industry as we have it today is sustainable. It makes absolutely no sense to me. The costs related to healthcare, health insurance are just unbelievable. We pay as almost as much for a health insurance premium as we do for our mortgage, which is mind-boggling to me. And that's just the premium. That's before we pay any actual out-of-pocket costs. And I can afford it. A lot of people can't. And I just don't know how that is sustainable. But beyond all that, beyond whether what's financially sustainable or not, one thing that you're seeing already is that more and more people are starting to use these AI tools to help with medical issues. And I think we are just at the very tip of the iceberg on that, of that technology being a sort of individualized response to help with healthcare needs. I think it's going to have a major impact on what we see with some of these, especially big medical complexes. On the higher education side, the truth is higher education's already in decline. That's been, I think we peaked in 2014 or something like that in college enrollment. It's become extraordinarily expensive. Insanely expensive. It's a major problem point for us in our country to have, people, 20 somethings graduating with six figures of college debt. Again, I don't know how that is sustainable financially. And I think what you've seen that's really happened over the last decade is many young people have agreed that the cost benefit solution isn't there. So they're either going into other fields where they don't really need a college degree, or they're using online tools for education and getting online degrees, which definitely have grown. And I think AI is only going to exacerbate that. So there's a certain sense, again, that you see things like, oh, it's grown and grown and grown, it's going to keep going that way. Oh, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Things do get to a point where they become so expensive that they just break. And it's not surprising that that often coincides with the new technology coming into play. So that's a couple other areas related to AI that I think are concerning, especially if you're in a city that's really, really relied on eds and meds. So if I'm right about this, what are the opportunities, and also where are the opportunities, and what can lovers of city do to help kind of course correct? Well, I think if you're in the real estate world, I think as much as a city guy as I am, it might pay me to say I think there's going to be a ton of opportunity in ex-urban areas and probably small towns that are within an easier commute to bigger cities. I think, especially with the rise of remote work, if it continues to be easier to do real remote work, you're going to see lifestyle moves in that regard, where people don't want to deal with cities in a big way, and they like sort of a smaller atmosphere to deal with. I have often thought about what might it be that would change the fortune of a lot of rural areas in small towns, as I mentioned, that really were crushed by the first wave of industrialization. And I just don't really know. I mean, I have the opportunity a lot to drive around. I live in Kansas City. I drive around rural Missouri and Kansas quite a bit. And it's pretty incredible to drive around those areas. And there's so much natural beauty, and there is such vast amounts of space, and so little people that live in these areas anymore. The depopulation is incredible. And a lot of that's not, I guess what I'm saying is it's not like it's visibly like bad. It's just that a lot of people have left. Farms have consolidated into much bigger and bigger operations. people have bought land and assembled them into large tracts, and so there's just a whole lot fewer people per square mile than there might have been. But you go through these areas and you think, wow, this is beautiful. These places could easily handle many more people without hardly even noticing it, and even reviving a lot of the historic towns. And I think that would be good for our culture and our society in so many ways. What I just don't know is what's the economic driver that does it? What are the cultural drivers? What are the economic drivers that really do that? Because at the end of the day, people still have to make a living doing something, uh, and um, and also young people in particular, they tend to want to move to places where there's a lot of other young people, for for dating and for everything else. They want to meet somebody, and we don't live in a society anymore where people meet in high school, and they get married and stay that way for life. I mean, I know that happens, but it's just not ubiquitous. And so young people tend to move to places where there's lots of other young people, and look for mates. And you don't have a lot of that in rural areas. So I don't know. I think there's just unbelievable physical opportunity, and a lot of these places are beautiful, and it would be nice to see them thriving more. But I'm not sure what the economic driver is right now. I think there's also a good chance a lot of suburbs will continue to do well. One of the other big notable changes from, say, the 1970s is that many suburbs of big cities have learned about the importance of walkability, and they've enhanced their own downtowns or built new ones from scratch. And so they have some of those qualities that they used to lack. And that's a major attraction point for a lot of suburban cities. And I think more of them will continue to learn how to grow those, how to have them be successful and safe, and will continue to attract investment. So the $10,000 question then is like, what if you're a lover of big cities? What can you do? What can we do to avoid this worst case scenario? And again, I'm sitting here today describing what I think is a worst case scenario that may not happen. Who knows? It's impossible to exactly know what the future holds, but I do give it a 50% chance of going this direction. But so what if you want to stop it? What if you really give a damn and you want to stop it? And, the first thing I would do is I would say, kind of go on a tangent, is that I wish it would be really nice if more people would really give a damn about how big cities are governed, how we're actually governed. In our country, our big cities are horribly governed. And I'm just going to say, I'm 55 years old. I probably I hate to say it, but I got more years behind me than ahead of me, and I have a hard time. Increasingly have a hard time with people who don't want to deal with reality and talk about reality. Um, I have seen my city is the one I'm most familiar with, but I've been and experienced many big cities in our country, and they've almost all been very badly managed my entire life. This is not especially anything new. I think it's gotten worse. I think there's a lot of aspects that have gotten worse, um, but this is the reality on the ground. And I've said it before. This is not because like big city governments are full of stupid people or awful people. There's a lot of great people who work in city government and people who work really hard and do a great job. But we have a systems problem, and I'll get back to that in a minute. So I also really have no desire to be partisan about this from a political standpoint. I frankly think partisan politics are just really dumb. I think loyalty to like lifelong loyalty to a political party, especially when there's only two of them, is especially dumb. I don't get it. I don't understand why people that I know and love think that way. Um, Life changes, people change, political parties change, ideas change. Um, and I think the wise person is always open minded to reviewing the reality as it is on the ground and changing your mind. and choosing accordingly. So I think blind political loyalty is just really dumb. Um, and also, I think people who really focus on that locally and think that they're only going to talk to the members of their own political tribe, whatever tribe it is, if like those are the only people you're going to work with, well, guess what? You're never going to get anything done. Never get anything good done. And your community is not going to move forward or be successful. Groupthink is really problematic in our democracy at the moment. And I would just encourage everybody to try to do whatever you can to break out of your bubbles and avoid groupthink and cultivate people around you who have different opinions and are willing to talk about them in a civil manner. Um, so again, so the partisan thing is not something I'm interested in, but there are there are real reasons to care about big cities. Big cities are where an awful lot of our economies today reside. A whole lot, millions of people live in big cities, people of all stripes. Um, and we have, unfortunately, some people who just love to make excuses for how poorly they're governed. They always say, oh, there's not enough money. Oh, it's really hard. It's complex. You don't understand. And I just, um, I don't buy it. I don't buy that. I've never bought it. And I find a lot of the excuse making is just people covering up for poor performance. There's also this weird contingent of people that root against big cities, which I don't understand as well. And they do so because they don't like the people who live in big cities or their politics, or because they have a competing interest. And again, I just think this is also dumb. And you know, I I'm the kind of person I have lived in larger cities all my adult life, but I grew up in small towns. I want everything to succeed. I want small towns and rural areas to thrive, and I want my city and I want the suburbs to thrive as well. So I just don't understand this. How people can be how people just love to crap on other areas and have them not do well because somehow that makes you look better. But um, there are real issues. There are these issues in our cities that we have to be honest about. If you're not honest about them, you can't solve it. So, like I said, crime is unspeakably high or unacceptably high in almost every big city. It's truly bad. We have enormous areas in most big cities that are in decline and look really awful. And doing business in a lot of big cities is very, very hard. It's harder and more expensive than other jurisdictions. That's something we run into all the time. So my plea here is not so much, I'm not making a plea to like politicians or to people working in government. My plea would be to people who are doing business, people in the so-called business community, to really pay attention and step up and make your city working a priority. I think oftentimes in business, people, we have too much of an attitude of like, well, that's their problem, it's their responsibility, and we kind of outsource our thinking to other people, and then we get surprised when things don't work. But effective local democracy really it takes work. It's hard. That democracy is hard. It requires our participation. And it needs participation from our smartest, most successful business people. Like we really need those people stepping up and helping out. And just as a little supplement here too, one of the things that I still run across. Again, I'm not a young person. I'm 55 years old. I've done a ton of different things, but there's still an awful lot of that older generation, the baby boomer generation, that was incredibly reluctant to pass the torch on to even people my age. And this is really difficult. This is a real problem in a lot of our cities because there's a lot of people my age who have incredible skills and knowledge and want to really help and do good things. And we're involved in all the day-to-day of getting things done. And I see people all the time like that who just really aren't highly valued by the generation older than them. And so what happens is eventually, um, people just check out and they say, well, I'm not valued, so therefore I'm not going to bother to participate at all. And so you miss out on incredibly skilled people who could do great things for your community. And then you have a generation younger or two generations younger who are not ready yet. They don't have the skills or the expertise yet to really do the things that need to be done, or the life experience that you just have to have to be an effective civic leader. So uh, I would just put in a plea here again that folks in that generation, it's really way past time to pass the torch to the people who are 10, 15, 20 years younger than you, who are really in the middle of everything day to day on any kind of important community initiatives. So, real quickly then on specific things that I think we can do to really help ward off problems is I just think I've talked about this before. I did a whole episode a while back, but we really need to care about normie middle class priorities. Like that needs to be the priority for cities: safety, schools, home ownership, cleanliness, good basic services. That needs to be the primary focus of cities, and doing those things to a very, very high level. And it's not getting distracted by other issues, but staying focused on these really basic things that middle class people care about. Because if you don't have a middle class, you're not going to have a successful city. Period. You might have a lot of wealthy people that live there, but there is no healthy city that has basically a lot of wealthy people and a lot of poor people. You've got to have middle class people. And then the second thing that I've talked about a little bit before, and we'll elaborate more on in the future, is this very wonky thing that I talked about in another interview not long ago about we really need to focus on decentralizing the day-to-day management and operations of local government. So, what do I mean by that? Well, modern American city governments, in my opinion, have a scale problem. And I think, when you go back and read like what the founders wrote of our country, they understood that self-governance uh, doesn't always work. Like it works really well in a certain context and a certain culture. And one of those contexts is that it needs to be small enough so that people can really access that local government. And they knew that scale, if things got really big, it would be a problem. And this is what I see all the time: is that I I've mentioned this before, but I've had the chance to work with lots of smaller cities, smaller towns, and I'm not saying that they're better, smarter people, but a lot of the local governments actually work better, and they're more effective, and they have higher satisfaction with their citizens, and some of that, and a big part of that's just the scale of it. And we could argue all day long about what that scale might be. I've thought before maybe it should be 25,000 people or maybe 50,000 people. That should be the units of management of local government. And when I say that, I mean like everything. I mean, I'm talking about like policing, trash, fire, your local city elected officials, etc. That at that scale, you can actually know who the people are that you need to talk to. And transparency is much easier, and you can hold people accountable. When local governments get too big, when the units get too big, not only does a lot of it break down and work well, but people lose trust. They don't know who to call for basic issue. Costs invariably get out of control on just about everything, and corruption becomes common because you can hide it easier. And it's just very hard to hold people accountable in general. So I'm more and more convinced every day as I work on these issues that the way forward involves somehow descaling these big cities so that they operate or governed in much smaller units. And I think that's the way that you can build community and build trust and have things work a lot better. And I think that is something that can help ward off some of the possible downsides for changes that might happen in a lot of our cities. I think having some competent, really, really, really high performing local government in the areas that normie middle class people care about that I listed before, that's the sort of thing that can really make a difference and help areas grow instead of decline. All right, so that I went on much longer than I thought I would today, but wanted to give you all little thoughts on things that I'm seeing. And those are sort of the downside things we're worried about. I probably should take a moment at a future episode and talk about all the good things that are happening and what I think the positive trends are or could be that could mean well for cities in the future. But today I'm out of time. So thank you so much for listening. Please like or subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. and hope everybody is looking forward to a great fall. And we'll talk to you soon.